Greetings, fellow travelers. Welcome to the 21st level of the RPG Cave. I'm one of your hosts, the level 99 human Archmage, and I'm joined, as always, by the level 99 Elf Ranger, Mr. Garret Bland. Garret, how are you doing today?
I'm doing just fine. I'm trying to wake up, of course, with that second cup of coffee. And hopefully by the time you're listening to these guys, I hope I get a Switch OLED. I don't have one right now. I don't have one right now.
Oh, you reminded me. I should have brought mine from the other room to brag a bit and gloat a bit.
Off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I see how it is.
I mean, to be fair, I ordered mine like months ago, so I've been preparing for this day and been playing a lot of Metroid. But that's not an RPG. We can't talk about Metroid on an RPG show. But you can technically play RPGs on the Switch OLED, so there is that. Also, quick shout out to Sean and Matt. We did have them join me for a very special episode of the RPG Cave that actually went live the week we're recording this, but the week you're hearing this the week after, where we did a Tales of Arise review, as well as a spoiler cast. So if you want to hear us talk about Tales of Arise for 2.5 hours, we have that up on the RPG Cave.
That sounds like a JRPG
feed.
Spoiler cast right there.
It definitely does.
Good length.
Well, I made them go into mechanics like we do, Garret, and other like. It was very much an RPG Cave episode, just with 3 people. So, as you can imagine, that's what made it such a lengthy conversation. But enough about that.
I'll need to listen to that and make my judgment right there, and just get the game right afterwards. So
for sure. Or I mean, you can always wait for a sale too. There's always that. But
that's true.
Let's jump into the show proper. Before we do, of course, we got to clear the dungeon of the pesky mobs. So if you like what we do and you want to support us, there's a number of ways to do that. Number one, you can subscribe to us on all your podcast services of choice: Google Play, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're in all the things, so check us out there. We also put up a video version of the show every single Saturday morning over on YouTube, youtube.com/YumiCaprice. If you want to see our beautiful faces every single week, you can definitely check us out there. Also, like, subscribe, share, do all the things that YouTube people tell you to do. And last but not least, if you want to throw a little tip in the old tip jar, patreon.com/YumiCaprice, how you do that. You get early access to this and all of our shows, as well as some exclusive content over there, because we do some exclusive podcasts as well. All right, it is time to read from the sacred text, Garret, because we've got another indie showcase. We actually did one of these in one of our first 5 episodes, I believe, of the show.
It was pretty early,
where we basically each chose 2 games to kind of give the spotlight to, because we want to give the spotlight to indie games, especially because a lot of indie RPGs, it's tough to do kind of a full episode on them. So we wanted to kind of give them some love and some shine on this type of episode. So once again, Garret and I each picked 2 indie RPGs. Hopefully we didn't pick the same ones. We didn't talk about it ahead of time because we wanted to be a surprise a little bit. And then we're going to kind of go in depth with them and kind of talk about the mechanics and what we liked about them and why they're awesome. So Garret, why don't you start us off? What is your first RPG that you want to talk about?
So my first RPG I want to talk about is a recent game that came out actually a couple years ago. It's called Fell Seal, Arbiter's Mark. I really enjoyed of what I played of this game, and it was probably maybe like 20 or 30 hours or something like that. It was a good chunk, but so this game is a turn-based tactical RPG. Grid-based, and it's hugely inspired by Final Fantasy Tactics.
And by hugely inspired, I mean it's pretty much just Final Fantasy Tactics.
It's a copy and paste kind of deal, and that's fine. That's okay. Like if Square Enix is not going to do it, then let an indie studio do it and do it very well. So Fell Seal Arbiter's Mark released on April 30th, 2019. It's developed by 6i Studios, so that's a 2-person team, actually from the ex-members of Studio Archcraft. You ever heard of them?
No.
Ryan? No, okay. Well, they're based in Montreal, and that's the studio behind this DS game called Black Sigil Blade of the Exiled, and it had terrible reviews. But I guess these are a couple of ex-members that love RPGs, love making games, and it's like, you know what? This is our first game, and went at it. And they did an incredible job. Published by 1C Entertainment. I haven't heard much of that publisher. It was released on Xbox One, PS4, Nintendo Switch, and PC. And the price is $30, so it's a good middling price, and I think the price is definitely justified with how much gameplay you're going to get out of this game. So yeah, it's story driven, set in a fantasy world with a little bit of steampunk in there. What you do is that, like Final Fantasy Tactics, you set up a team in a battle of various characters. You have your own roster, and you can pick them. And they all have different classes. And those classes you can get to choose from. I'll get more in depth later. You set the pieces in, and then like Final Fantasy Tactics, your turn is based on your speed of the character and the enemies themselves. And so you'll see a little bit of like a tiled turn-based bar at the top, so you know exactly what character is going to go next, either the enemy or your team. And that can change based off upon throughout the game, where you can have some buffs that can slow down speed or gain speed. So that will dynamically change a lot as well. I think what's really impactful about this game is the gameplay itself. There's a lot of combat involved with this tactics, but even more so with buffs. There's a lot to do with synergy and helping your team out in terms of buffs, and also weakening your enemies at the same time. If you don't lean into those skills, I find it having a very hard time going through these levels. It can get pretty difficult. So it is grid-based with set elevations. And then each character has a main class where you can like set kind of like a general set of skills, but then you also have a subclass itself. And then basically when you play like maybe a couple hours in those classes, you can pay off all the skills you want in there. It's not too much. It's not deep at all. And then you get to choose what skills you want for that character. And so it becomes very flexible.
Yeah, it's customizable in a lot of ways. Like you can really probably customize your characters in interesting ways probably. And that probably really plays into the strategy you talked about with the buffs and debuffs and stuff like that too.
Exactly. And then weapons are compatible with certain classes as well. As any tactics RPG, character placement is super important. The way you attack your characters is super important, whether it's off the side or the back is more, it could be more deadly depending on what kind of skills you have. And then you can create new characters along the way throughout your journey. And then you just basically create an army of characters and classes. As I said, the difficulty does ramp up, and you're going to have to do some grinding in this game. But if you do like that tactics gameplay, then the grinding is not as, I guess, tedious or boring as, let's say, a turn-based like JRPG or something like that. They do a pretty good job of like, if you're repeating a level, then you're going to do kind of different objectives in there. There's going to be a little bit of difference in the enemy layout. So at least there's that. And then once you ramp up your grind, you can go back into the main levels. I heard the story in this game is pretty good. I did not really pay attention to this story just because I just really like the junk food gameplay a bit more than just focusing on the writing of this game. I know it's pretty complex, but I think the art style in the story really just detached from me. It's like, you know what? I just really want to play the game, not necessarily get into the story. So the art is hand-drawn and it's tile-based. It looks okay for an indie studio. Like, it's not a bad-looking game. I just think, I don't know what's the right phrase for it. I don't want to say cheap, but it's kind of in that, like, it's a character I can make off of clip art. That's what
like they were going more for almost like a PS2, PS3 kind of look for it. I think just from what I've seen from like screenshots and stuff like that. Because this is actually a game I've never played. So but it's always been a game I've been interested in because I've always really liked Final Fantasy Tactics, the original, and everything you're describing with the combat just sounds very similar to that game, which is awesome. Like I love to hear that, including the difficulty because the difficulty was also really hard in Final Fantasy Tactics too. So it's sounds pretty awesome. But the visuals, you're right. It has like from what I've seen anyways, as someone who hasn't really played, like it's not like you can definitely tell like there's not a huge budget behind this game, but
Yes,
they
definitely.
did kind of the best they could with what they had available, I'm guessing. So
Definitely. And like you see in the reviews, like the art style or the budget really doesn't matter. Like these reviews, they're pretty good. Like a Metacritic score of 86, I think it's one of those indie darling RPGs that recently came out, and I think they did a pretty good job. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's kind of like the summary I have for Fail Seal's Arbiter's Mark. I think it goes on sale quite often, and I heard the Switch game runs pretty well. So yeah, just wait for a sale. Maybe it's like $15 or something like that. That's an easy buy if you're into tactical RPGs.
And this is also a game I've just heard a lot of great things about. Like again, as I mentioned, I haven't really played it yet. It's a game that I keep being like in the back of my mind. I'm like, all right, I need to play this game eventually. But I just haven't really had like a good window maybe to play it yet. But it's definitely one I want to check out, especially because again, like I don't think Square's ever going to go back to tactics at this point. But you never know. They're doing a lot of really experimental stuff right now, like with that card RPG that they've got right now, or Project Triangle Strategy, which is kind of like Final Fantasy Tactics as well in a lot of ways, which
That's
also
true,
probably compares a lot to this game as well. But yeah, I'd love to check this one out at some point because it sounds pretty interesting. And again, I like the idea too that again, it's more about kind of the strategy is more about just where to place your guys on the battlefield. Even though that plays a lot into it, it's also about, the strategy comes in with, picking your skills ahead of time and then using the advantage of, speed boosts or other buffs to your advantage and kind of
rooting.
Cool.
Gosh, there's just so many skills in this one. And from mages to thieves to warriors, like it runs the whole gamut, of course, of like a typical RPG. And shout out to Sean at the time. He did give me the code to this on Xbox. So shout out to him for introducing me to this game.
And also, I like the fact, too, that even though some RPG fans might look at it as a downside because they might be the type of people who feel like the more time it takes to beat a game, the better it is, like because it's the more value for your buck, I guess. But I kind of like the idea of having like a 20 to 30 hour experience like this and not having it go on forever either. Like, and have it be a little more digestible than like Tales of Arise, for example, which we just did the review on, which was 40 hours. Not everyone has 40 hours available to them. And not only that, but this sounds like a perfect game on Switch to play too, because like this is the type of game that I would love to kind of like pick up and, do a battle or two and then kind of put it down. So yeah, sounds pretty awesome. I should definitely check it out and kind of make it a priority to play it at some point. So
there you go.
There you go. All right. So Fail Seal is our first game. Garrett, my first game is a game that was actually my backup the last time we did this, because I had actually prepared 3 games last time we did this, just in case we had a duplicate. But and so this game, I already had the notes ready to go, Garrett. So I was a bit lazy. But also, this is a game that I is kind of near and dear to my heart. Actually came out the exact same year as Fail Seal Arbiter's Mark. So also a 2019 game, and that's Indivisible. This is from Lab Zero Games, the makers of Skullgirls, the fighting game. But they've got a history that I'm going to get into in a little bit that it's impossible to not talk about it when talking about this game. So this game launched on PS4, Xbox One, and PC on October 8th, 2019. And then it released later on Nintendo Switch on April 28th, 2020 by accident. By the porting house that accidentally said, because the game was supposed to be delayed until the end of May because they'd kind of ironed out most of the bugs with the game, but the problem is they hadn't added the co-op mode or the New Game Plus mode to the game yet, which were supposed to be day one parts of the game. And that was the reason the game was delayed until late May. But the porting house just put it up anyways. And they're like, well, I guess we're rolling with it. It's actually a similar situation to, I don't know if you remember this, but when Cooking Mama came to Switch.
I remember Cooking Mama as well. That situation was
the porting house just put it up without, the consent of the owners of Cooking Mama, and it just spiraled out of control. It was like one of the worst Switch games. But Indivisible itself wasn't super bad on Switch when it came out. It's just a weird situation where they just published it out of nowhere. But for the most part, I played this on Xbox One when it first came out because I had heard a lot of things about this game leading up to its release, and from all the trailers and gameplay that I saw, I was like, I knew this is going to be kind of a day one game for me. So I'm glad I actually checked it out at the time because it's pretty dang awesome. So first off, shout out to the music being composed by Hiroki Kakuta, who we actually talked about on the Mana episode, because he's actually the composer of Secret of Mana, Trials of Mana, like all of the earlier Mana games. And I love the music in all of those games. And you can definitely hear kind of the influence of the same kind of style from those games and the music from this game, which is super cool. So if you're a Mana fan, I think you'll really love the music in this game. Indivisible was actually originally announced as an Indiegogo campaign back on October 5th, 2015. And while it didn't actually hit its goal initially within the 40-day period for Indiegogo, they were able to basically extend the goal by 20 additional days, because they were going for 1.5 million. They only raised 950,000, but they were so close to the goal that Indiegogo was like, you know what, we'll give you 20 extra days to reach it. And they actually met the goal on December 2nd, 2015. So, because otherwise they had actually mentioned that if it didn't hit the goal, they weren't actually going to be able to do this game.
That would have sucked.
There was actually a chance that this game never would have come out. So before I get into kind of the gameplay and the story setup and stuff, there is something I need to mention with this game that comes along with the territory. So the studio Lab Zero Games actually no longer is around at the time we're recording this, after a huge controversy with their owner, Mike Zaymot, which basically there was a bunch of, sexual allegations against him as kind of the head of the company. This basically led to a mass exodus of all the employees from Lab Zero, and then all the people that didn't leave, he basically got laid off, and he basically closed the studio on October 9th, 2020. Just a real sad situation there.
That is a very sad story. I remember the not paying part. I did not realize about the sexual harassment.
Yeah.
That was right before people were not getting paid. Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah. And there was supposed to be a bunch of DLC and a bunch of updates for this game to come at some point. But people were, as soon as people heard about the sexual allegations and the paycheck stopped coming in, that was pretty much over. Like everyone kind of just left.
Oh yeah.
So, of course, at the same time, this is kind of a very different situation from a lot of situations like this that we talk about with a lot of other games companies, like the Activision Blizzard stuff that's happening right now, as an example. I usually am not really talking about Activision Blizzard stuff because there's a culture within that company that leads to a lot of problematic elements, and I feel like it's very hard to separate myself from talking about those games in particular. Unlike this game, where games made by Lab Zero, even though Mike was heavily involved with a lot of these games, I can really separate myself from it because a lot of the other members of the company are not like this, and there wasn't really a culture of misappropriate behavior or anything like that. So
it was really just one person. It was
really just one person. It just happened to be the head of the company, as opposed to just one random employee, which just is a real sour note, unfortunately. But again, I still think that I personally can look past it and still really enjoy this game, which is why I wanted to talk about it, because I still think that Indivisible is an incredible game that is worth playing, that I think even before all this stuff happened, I feel like it's a game that really flew under people's radars back in 2019 when it actually came out, because there were actually a lot of games that came out that year that were pretty awesome. But this one in particular, was one of my top 5 favorite games of that year. So I actually really enjoyed it. So first off, Indivisible, also a hand-drawn game, kind of like Falciel that we just talked about. But I do think the animation quality was a lot better in this game than a game like Falciel. And a lot of that has to do with a lot of the animation studios that actually helped collaborate on this. For example, Studio Trigger helped collaborate on a lot of stuff. Okay. And if you don't know Studio Trigger, they worked on stuff like Kill la Kill and a bunch of different anime series. You also had other anime directors and producers working on this as well, such as the director of Little Witch Academia, as well as a bunch of other shows. So you could definitely show from the animation, from the character designs, like there was some top tier talent working on this, combined with also Skullgirls, which was also a hand-drawn fighting game and also looked very pretty. Even if you go back and play it today, it's actually a very good looking game. as far as the story is concerned, basically there's this ancient battle with these two gods that happens, and basically this evil goddess is kind of sealed away, but a child is born from this, which of course is kind of your main character in the story here, and basically her town is attacked by the Empire because essentially your town is kind of follows this religion based around one of the two gods that during this battle, and they're basically trying to stamp out all of the religion in the land, I guess, around these gods. So after they basically destroy the town, you basically set off on an adventure basically to stop them from going around and destroying other cities and whatnot. But what was interesting about the story in this game is you actually have a ton of party members with you, but you only ever really see your one main character throughout the story, because the rest of the characters that she meets along the way get sucked into her head. Basically, there's a portal that exists in your mind that teleports them to like a comfy world, that like this alternate dimension that they kind of hang out
like a Pokeball.
Yeah, well, exactly. And they basically build like a house there and stuff like that. Like it shows it from time to time and stuff, and it's kind of adorable. But you recruit a lot of party members along the way through the game. But the way this game works is it's actually a Metroidvania that also is a turn-based role-playing game. So
interesting.
Essentially, you explore the environments as kind of like a 2D platformer, and as a Metroidvania, because you'll get powers and abilities throughout the game that will allow you to access new areas that you'll kind of see, and then you'll have to backtrack a little bit to kind of be like, oh, I can do a double jump now, so I can go back to this one area where it was like the platform is a little bit higher, so you can double jump up there to get some more items or progress the story. But then as you run into enemies along the platforming, it'll actually initiate a turn-based battle. So it actually switch to a different screen essentially, and you'll have your 4 main party members. You'll always have the main character, but then you'll have 3 party members of your choosing that all basically pop out of her head to fight along with you. But the battle system is very reminiscent and heavily inspired, kind of like Felseal is, because this is actually like they're very similar, ideas. But this is based off the Valkyrie Profile series over at Square Enix. So the idea is each of your 4 party members is mapped to the 4 face buttons on your controller, and basically you can combo using the 4 characters together. Plus, if you press a direction on the D-pad, whether it's up, down, left, or right, your characters will perform different moves. Like if you've got a mage character, as an example, like they'll perform a bunch of different spells and abilities based on where you're kind of pressing on your D-pad. And it was like actually a really engaging and fun battle system. I'm actually a pretty big fan of the Valkyrie Profile games from Square back in the day. And it's a series that Square has really forgotten about. And as you can imagine, Garrett, it's not a series we've heard about in a long time. The last entry of that series was on the Nintendo DS. So it's been a long time since we've gotten any of those from Square. Yeah. But yeah, I just really enjoyed the battle system and the exploration, especially again as a big Metroidvania fan, plus an RPG fan. Like merging those two together, like worked in a way I was not expecting to really enjoy in the way that I did with this game. So, cool. Very enjoyable gameplay with this one. The story itself, I think it has some good moments, but it's not like the main reason I'm kind of playing it. It's fine. It's there. It's the main reason why I didn't go into a ton of detail with the story, because I definitely think it's probably the weakest element of it, but the gameplay, the combat, just super fun. So
cool.
I really enjoyed this game quite a lot.
I did play this very little, like maybe an hour of the beginning of the game when it was on Game Pass. I think it's out of there.
It is
now.
Yeah.
I think I agree with you with the story. I think it was like the first 10 minutes. I'm like, yeah, you ain't coming here for the writing. Got it. And then I played a little bit of the gameplay. It's good. I just did not really get into it that much. I did not realize it was a Metroidvania until you said it. I guess I just didn't go far enough along with it. But it definitely reminds me of another game I played on Vita, and it's also on PlayStation, Fallen Legion. Ever heard of that one?
I have, but I've never played it.
Yeah, it's very similar with, like, I guess you said the Valkyrie Profile games, where it's like you have a certain button with the certain character, and you could do certain directions with them. I reviewed Fallen Legion for We the Nerdy back in the day, and I have a poor taste in my mouth with that type of gameplay just because it just got stupid hard at the end, and like on Vita itself, it was unplayable because it would just like freeze up and like the game was not stable. But I should give this a good shot. Definitely on Xbox or PlayStation. If you think it's a pretty good rendition of that gameplay.
Yeah, I think it's pretty fun, but to your point, it also gets difficult towards the end as well. So just keep that in mind. That I mean, we're all about difficult games today, Garrett. That's kind of our theme. I mean, my second game is definitely difficult too, but it's actually harder than the one I'm talking about here. So speaking of other games, Garrett, what's your second game?
So this game I don't think it's as hard as we've been saying on previously. And I would say it's technically not indie, but I think it is budget as indie. And I categorize it as indie. It was never there were physical releases, but it was a smaller game. And that is Child of Light.
I knew it. I knew you were going to pick this one, Garrett. Luckily, I came prepared.
There you go. That's one of my favorites in the smaller RPG genre. It was released April 29th, 2014, and that was a cross-gen title with PS3, PS4, Xbox 360, and Xbox One. It came out later on Vita in July, and then it finally came out on Switch in 2018, as it was a year into the Switch cycle. Child of Light is one of the last games from Ubisoft that was based on the UbiArt framework. And they kind of died down from that engine basically because they're more focused on the games that they're making with live service and their tentpole franchises. Which
is too bad because like all of the UbiArt games were amazing. You got Rayman Legends, you had Vandal Hearts, you had this. Like there were some fantastic games that used that engine. Like I can't believe they never went back to it for anything.
Me too. And they have an engine that exists. Like I would say, outsources too. I mean, that would be a great thing. I think a lot of indie studios would benefit from it. But yeah, so Child of Light was developed by Ubisoft Montreal and published by Ubisoft. And it is a platform puzzler along with some turn-based RPG mechanics. So it takes place in this fairy tale forgotten kingdom called Lemuria. And it's originally ruled by this Queen of Light. And the Queen of Light vanished. And then this Queen of Night took over the land and ruled it with an iron fist. And it becomes all dark and dreary. And that's the beginning of the game. You're starting into this land that seems foreign to you. And it's kind of like a fairy tale, and then you just go out through the story and see what it is like. Again, as I said, it's a turn-based role-playing game. I think it has a time mechanic up at the top, if I remember correctly. And you have your main character, who is Aurora. She is the princess of this fairy tale land, and he just tries to find her way home. And then she runs into a few of companions along the way, a few characters. Basically, I think one's a rabbit. It's like other types of animals and fairy tale creatures, and there's a huge overarching story behind it. I think what's really novel about this game is the story itself, the emotion, the writing behind it was fantastic. It's very poetic. It's always in like a children's storybook type of feel. And it didn't feel childish to me at all throughout the game. I think it delivers the story in such an impactful way. And I remember in 2014, I was literally in tears in some of these emotional turning points throughout the game. So I think that's what's really great about it. I think the RPG mechanic and the gameplay behind it is serviceable. It's really good. I don't think it's fantastic in any way, but it throughout the game it's interesting and I'm glad to go through it. And also Aurora ages throughout the game. Basically she is a young child in the beginning, and then as she goes out through the story, she's kind of like developing relationships and also being more mature, right? So she was a really great character development, and that actually reflects on the RPG mechanics itself. And so she got more powerful, she got more skills to be involved with, and so on and so forth. Yeah,
instead of your character just getting buff, she's essentially just getting older, and as she gets older, she gets more powerful kind of thing.
Exactly. and it's pretty simple. The gameplay, it's just like they attack and you attack, and it's a time-based mechanic. And then you have to time yourself pretty correctly if you want to defend yourself. So it's kind of like reading enemies' moves as well throughout the battle. Again, it's I think it's good. I don't think it's really fantastic in any way, but it's good. I did play on 360 on 2014. It was totally playable throughout that time. And then I actually played it later that year on Vita, and it was pretty good on Vita as well. There was supposed to be a sequel to this game. They actually teased it out. It's like, hey, Child of Light, the sequel to Child of Light.
They announced it like a long. I think they actually did a formal announcement of it, and it just dissolved into nothing essentially.
Yeah. So throughout the years, ever since like 2015 or something like that, they announced it, and I remember the guys talking about it, and then by 2019. They're like, sorry, we're focused on a different direction because Ubisoft not wanting to do these smaller games anymore, which is sad to see. I always predicted at E3, it's like Child of Light 2 is about to come out. I feel it in my gut. And they just never go back to that well. And they just, I wish they went back to it. They could outsource it. Please. Like, I can see another indie studio have a great take on this game. In the story as well. So anyways,
even though they could have done it on like a smaller scale or it's not like the problem isn't even that it couldn't make money, because they could easily make money with something like that. I think, like, even if they like slash the development costs and again outsourced it, like you mentioned, Garret, and put it like just get it out there, and it would still probably make a pretty good return, but the problem is it's not like the Ubisoft level of returns that they're really looking for. Like, it's not going to make the hundreds of millions that Far Cry 6 that just came out is going to, right? So
that's true.
I think that's just the way that they look at it. Although I don't know, they've had Ubisoft has had some games recently where they had these big budgets behind them and they didn't do anything. So like Ghost Recon Breakpoint, for example. So
and that just did nothing, and they slashed that the price of that game very heavily, like right after a month. I just think Ubisoft is like, okay, this is our template of franchises. This is where we want to go towards, like live service type of elements into our games. That's where we're going, and they just dropped UbiArt framework, just on the wayside as they go, which sucks. But
getting back to your question, because I know you had asked me, what I thought about Child of Light. It was a game I liked a lot. My memory is very hazy of it because it's been a very long time since I played it. I played it on PlayStation 3, so which is kind of like you with 360, just on the opposite side of the fence essentially. Which is why I can't really recall the specific things about it, but I remember it being like a really solid, turn-based RPG. Like, I remember having a great time playing it. I remember some really emotional moments, just like you described, Garret. I wasn't in tears like you were, but I was definitely hit by the story as well. But again, I can't recall specific moments. It's been like it's been like 8 years since I played.
Okay, around there, yeah.
It's been a very long time. So
it is on sale constantly on PS4 and Xbox stores and Nintendo Switch. I've seen it probably like $3 or something like that.
They're just trying to give it away. They're just like, please take all the copies of this.
Exactly. And like, I heard, like, get the bundle with Valiant Hearts, because Valiant Hearts is a very great UBR game as well.
Oh, if you want a game that's going to make you cry, to go along with it. Just train to Sadville right there, but get both those games and you'll be set for a sad weekend.
Yeah, pretty much.
But a fun weekend, because those games are both really good. So
yes.
Nice.
So there you go. Child of Light.
Very nice. I mean, I knew if we did enough of these indie showcases, Garret, you would actually bring Child of Light at some point. So there you go. Because again, it's not, even though it's produced by Ubisoft, it's like, it definitely it has that indie game feel to it. I definitely agree with that. In the same way that Indivisible, even though it was actually published by 505 Games eventually, which is also a bigger publisher, again, I still qualify that as an indie game too. So there you go. All right. Last game on this list. Very hard to game, of course, because, again, your boy Ryan has to bring all the hard games to the show here.
Of course.
Darkest Dungeon is my pick for this list. Yep, Garrett can already see it coming. So this game was developed by Red Hook Studios, and it's an indie game in the truest sense because they published it themselves. It was actually their very first game. It launched on PC on January 19th, 2016. It was actually early access on PC. And then it eventually got a later release date after that. But then it was followed up by releases on PS Vita and PS4 on September 27th, 2016. And then on Nintendo Switch, Xbox One in January and February of 2018, respectively. So it's on pretty much everything now, regardless of what platform you're playing on. And it's another turn-based RPG, which we've talked about a lot on the show. Interesting enough, and this is an interesting wrinkle, if you're a Canadian, you might actually recognize this. The music in the game was composed by Stuart Chatwood, who, if you're a Canadian and you've heard of a band called The Tea Party before, they were a rock band back in the late 90s, early 2000s, which I actually really liked a lot. I've seen them in concert many, many times. And Stuart was kind of the bass player and the keyboard player for The Tea Party. So he actually did all of the music for this game. And The Tea Party was known for doing some mixing some folksy stuff with some with 90s alternative rock. And it was like a really interesting kind of dynamic. And they had some really awesome songs. And you can definitely hear kind of that same kind of style, musical stylings in this game as well with kind of the game's music, which is something I really like. So basically, the story of Darkest Dungeon, you basically play as a player that you don't actually see. You play as you, essentially, who basically learns that you've inherited an estate as well as basically a small town from your ancient ancestor, whose life goal is for you to explore the dungeons and catacombs below the manor. So this is not really like a story-heavy game for the most part. That's pretty much all to this. There is kind of to the story for the most part. There's some smaller story beats that happen as you kind of explore the dungeon, the darkest dungeon, as you will. But for the most part, that's kind of where the story kind of ends, because it's not really that type of RPG, because it is more of a, fun, in quotations, RPG.
Punishable.
If you want punishment, this is the game for you. So the dungeons themselves are procedurally generated. So they kind of reminded me of the dungeons in a game like Diablo, as an example, where they were.
It's a dungeon crawler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely a dungeon crawler, but it's turn-based. So it's not an action RPG like a Diablo is, or a Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, or anything like that. There's also permadeath in this game as well. So
yes,
you actually, as the player, you don't fight as yourself. You actually recruit basically people who live in the town to basically go into the dungeon for you. So you usually recruit a party of 4 to basically go in and explore the dungeon. And usually you'll recruit more people than that in case your people die off, or there's a bunch of psychological effects or other things that can basically ailments that can affect your party members, such as them getting scared or getting PTSD or getting stressed out, or all kinds of crazy stuff that can happen as they brave the horrors that is the darkest dungeon, as they kind of explore it. So you actually have to relieve their stress, and each character class, because there's 50 different character classes of characters that you can recruit through this game. Each character has their own set of vices, I guess, things that help them relieve stress, but also things that make them more stressed out. If they run into specific monsters, they'll get stressed out more so than when they run into other monsters. So you kind of have to relieve their stress either by, sending them to the bar or the strip club, or, wherever they need to go, whatever they need to do to kind of, blow off some steam or kind of recover from some of the stuff that they see in these dungeons, because
it's traumatic.
This game is hard. Very,
so hard.
Very, very hard. But at the same time, I think that even though it is a very difficult game, I still think it's actually a very rewarding experience in spite of it being difficult. So essentially, when you go into combat, again, it's turn-based combat, and each player essentially on your team essentially takes a turn, and then the monsters kind of take a turn. But essentially, you line up your characters in a specific line of 4, and you basically choose ahead of the battle where each person kind of lines up. So you usually want to kind of keep your weaker characters in the back, or archers and stuff like that, because you have archers and mages and stuff like that who can be killed very easily, which is why you kind of want to have them away from the enemies. But depending on where you run into an enemy, sometimes the order gets reversed. So sometimes your guys in the back are super exposed to the enemies, and then you run into some interesting stuff when that happens. That's why like my strategy is to kind of keep like the two weaker members kind of in the middle, and then have like two like tank-like characters on kind of the outside of the party is kind of usually how I do it. But yeah, it's just so the combat's turn-based. It's all hand-drawn, just like most of the games we've talked about on the show.
It looks really good.
Yeah, this is a game that actually really impressed when it came out, I think, visually, and I still think it looks really good today if you actually play it, even on PS4, or even the Vita version actually runs really well. It also runs really well on
I did play the Vita
Switch.
version. I think with the Vita version itself, I don't know why, but like it's doing a little too much with the controls. There's a lot of small boxes, a lot of small text. So if you get used to it, cool, but like going into it, like maybe the first 30 minutes or an hour, you're probably going to be a little confused of what
probably
to do.
works a little bit better on the Switch screen, probably, because the screen there's a little bit more real estate there, I think. But but either way, like I still think it's a game that's worth playing if you like really difficult procedurally generated, turn-based RPGs, because I do think it is a rewarding experience. That it's also surprisingly tactical. Like you really have to think about every single move that you make, what your party's composition is, and just how important that is to the gameplay. I love how all that stuff works into it. The best part is that this pick is kind of timely, even though I didn't actually realize we were this close when actually putting this together. Because I was like, I'm going to talk about Darkest Dungeon because I actually really liked it a lot when it came out. But there's actually a sequel to Darkest Dungeon.
There is,
that was announced in 2019, but it's actually out in a couple weeks.
In a couple weeks, early access to Steam, right?
Early access starts on October 26th. So
that's
very soon. Very soon you'll be able to once again
for the Halloween spirit.
Exactly.
Dark and grim.
If you just want to get your soul crushed and kicked in before Halloween, this is the perfect way to do it. But I knew it was coming out soon, but I couldn't remember for the life of me when it was coming out. But it's actually coming out in a couple weeks from the time you're listening to this. Or I guess this will be out by the time you're listening to this, it'll be next week. So it'll be out in basically a week. So
Yeah. I think what's punishing about this game, other than the placement of your characters and the ailments, is it's a lot of game of chance.
Yeah.
There's a lot of 30% this, 20% that. And
it reminds me of XCOM in that way, where like your chance to hit.
Very much like XCOM,
tough. Yeah.
And it's like when something fails, you're like, are you serious? Why is this like it would be a 90% hit rate or something like that, miss. And I'm like, that's impossible. Why are you doing this to me? I think it's especially punishing in that route. Like you anticipate based off the statistics to go your way, but it's definitely
if anything, it never goes your way. Just anticipate that it doesn't. That's the
Occam's razor. Yeah.
Exactly.
Pretty much. I did play this for a while on Vita and realized I don't have the guts to go through this game that much. It is a very hard game. But I do see the appeal of it. I love the roguelite nature of it. I love the progression of it as well. I like how you go back to your real estate and you can further improve your separate buildings. Like I think there's a lot of different buildings.
Yeah, because you're like essentially the town mayor, essentially. So you're basically bankrolling a bunch of the facilities in your town and kind of leveling them up and stuff like that as you go as well. As you progress through the dungeon, you get more and more money essentially. But money becomes a commodity very quickly as well too, because it's a very strategic resource. You can't just blow it on everything because you'll run out of it very quickly when you start losing a bunch of your soldiers and whatnot. So
I've seen some pro players of Darkest Dungeon, and once they figure out a tactic, they can go on forever with this game, and it's like boom, 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 boom. I'm like, and they would play hundreds of hours of this game. Like this is a unending type of game, right? Like there's
a quote unquote ending to the story
with credits,
but you can kind of go on for as long as you kind of want with this game. So there's as much game there as you can kind of, keep your sanity for, I guess.
Pretty much. But good pick.
Yeah.
It's,
I had to talk about it.
Like,
It's a game I
forgot.
really like. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of actually forgot about this game, but I know it's beloved by a lot of people, and it's a very solid RPG.
Yeah, especially I played it when I first started playing it when it was in early access. I didn't play it when it first came out, but I had heard a lot of really good things about it over the summer after it had come out that same year, and I was like, all right, I'm going to play this game, and I put a ton of time into it on PC. So
nice.
I'm glad that I was able to finally talk about it here, and it's the type of game where I don't think it needs a whole episode, but I thought it'd be a great pick for this episode. But those are all the indie RPGs that we wanted to talk about today. Normally we would kind of go to questions at this point, but we didn't actually get any questions this week, Garrett. Sad face.
Wah, wah.
So folks at home, if you'd like to have your question read and answered here on the RPG Cave, there's a number of ways to do that. Number one, on Fridays, we put up a question poll up on our Twitter page, twitter.com/you-me-capriz. There we go. That's the real place. Or if you're watching on YouTube, you can leave a comment below this video asking your question, and we'll read it on the show. Or you can hit us up on Discord. Just join the You, Me, Capri Discord. The link is in the show notes as well. It's free to join, so you can leave your question in the RPG Cave section, and we'll answer it on the show. But I think that's going to do it for this week's episode. Next week, Garrett, we'd actually promised last week we would be doing a Vita episode this week, but I got the date wrong. It's actually next week.
Yes.
So we're going to be doing our Vita RPGs next week, which I'm super excited to talk about with you. But then after that, we're going to be going back to specific series because we got the Skyrim's anniversaries coming up, Garrett.
Oh,
in a few months. So
I can't wait for that one.
We're going to be talking about Skyrim in 2 weeks, which is going to be fun.
Yes.
And then Shin Megami Tensei 5 is around the corner. And we're, of course, going to be talking about the Shin Megami Tensei series then. So those are kind of what we've got on the docket coming up. So before we go, Garrett, plugs go.
You can follow me on Twitter @BlandExplosion, and I'm also co-host to the Nintendo Shack, part of the Play Some Video Games Podcast Network. We go live on normally Thursday nights, recently Friday nights at twitch.tv/PSVG, and you can support them over at patreon.com/PSVG.
It's all because Rebecca and Elaine wanted to gloat about their OLEDs to you, Garrett. I understand.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we're trying to convince Rebecca to get the OLED. Yeah. Hashtag give Garrett and Rebecca Switch OLEDs. That's the hashtag.
It's a thing we need to happen anyways. As for me, you can find me on Twitter @Ryan Turford. You can find us on Twitter @YouMeCapriz, and on YouTube, youtube.com/YouMeCapri, and on podcast services around the globe. So for Garrett Bland, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been level 21 of the RPG Cave, and we're out.
Bye-bye.
The RPG Cave's mana is fueled by patrons over at patreon.com/YouMeCapri. And I want to say thanks to each and every one of our Patreon supporters for all of your support throughout the years, as well as supporting our independent content. And let's start by thanking our premium producers, Dallas Ford, Lee Navarro, the fearless leader of the Phoenix Overdrive Extra Life team, and Jonathan Brown. You can find his content over at youtube.com/PM Entertainment. Our platinum producers, Robbie Bobby Mailer and Trucker Sloth, and our gold members, Argo, Brendan Myers, Dallas Robbins, Emily O'Kelly, Heather Boney, James Johnson, Joel Brooks, Jose Jimenez, Mac Time, Benji Kong, Marcus O'Neill, RJ Kern, Dano, Skinny Matt, Mr. and Mrs. Nasty Boots, Foolish Fuji, and Xavier Reyes. Thank you all for all of your support,